Thank you very much indeed. It is really, really good to be back at a crowd event, another packed room as they always are for these events. And what a real treat it is for me to share the stage with Christiana. You know, for the last 6 or 7 years in Davos, I've managed to steal maybe, 10 minutes with you once a year.
You have to be very honest. At 7 in the morning.
Yeah, at 7 o'clock in the morning, 10 minutes every year for the last 7 or 8 years. But we've always managed to have a really engaging conversation, and one that's always stayed with me. You know, very quickly, at Reuters, we do a live show every year in Davos across the 4 days. First 3 days, we talk with policymakers and business about the state of the world. On the Saturday, or the last day, we put them to one side, we bring in the NGOs, and we try and find out from the likes of Christiana, you know, what really needs to happen, what they really need to hear from policymakers and from business to make change. And I think I've asked Christiana the same question on many occasions after Lima, after Copenhagen. You know, yes, everyone's making the right noises, but are we actually making any difference? Are we actually seeing any change? And you've always been optimistic. And then, of course, came Paris. So delighted to have you with us. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to kick us off for the first 35 minutes or so, and then I'm going to open it up to you, the audience, to ask your questions, and I'm sure you'll have plenty for Christiana. I want to start with the context, get that out of the way. What's happened in the US in particular, G20 communiques with climate change pieces taken out of them, scientists saying this is no longer on the agenda, the momentum has gone. You have not made a secret that you think Trump isn't going to make a difference, really, to the momentum. Is that you being brave and stoical in public?
Is that me being stubborn? Is that your question?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. It's really fun to be here tonight, and thank you, Axel, for doing this tonight. So, no, it's not me being brave. I think it really depends on what are you focusing on, okay? So if your focus happens to be the international political conversation that I used to have the honor to lead, if it happens to be the international negotiations, I think we're up for a very, very difficult 3 or 4 years because the United States will certainly not be the leader in a pack of actually quite enthusiastic countries anymore. And in best cases, they will actually be doing some beneficial or benign, let's say, benign ignorance of the issue. In the worst cases, they will be a handbrake. And we don't know which way they're going to go. We don't know if they're going to exit the Paris Agreement, which will take 4 years, by which time he will be leaving the White House, or if they're going to exit the convention, which take one year, or if they're going to stay in both and then just not implement. I mean, there are too many options for what they could do, and we have no idea what they're going to do. But what we do know for sure is that the political conversation is not going to be as fluid, certainly not between the United States and China, but also between the United States and many other countries who are convinced of this. So the political conversation is not going to be as fluid, point number one. And point number two, the financial support is going to be a huge issue, right? Because the United States is going to pull back its support of the entire United Nations, at least that's what they have said, and also predictably of the climate process. So those two pieces will definitely be impacted. The question then, of course, is how are countries going to react to that? And countries, the official positions of countries, are not going to be as friendly and as open and as supportive as we had over the past few years for understandable reasons. Because the United States continues to be the greatest economy and should be leading on this. Having said all of that, that is the space of politics. And I have the incredible, fantastic opportunity of no longer being responsible for that. And so what is really exciting is that the other space, which is also, and there were two spaces that we continually held in our two hands, and that's why we have two hands, right? Because you had two realities. You had the political reality, you had the economic reality, and we held those two and used them to support each other in Paris. We will probably not having those two support each other over the next 3 or 4 years. Right. But there's no doubt that the real economy is moving forward.
Which is a real problem, surely. That they're not going to be supporting each other over the next few years, right?
I don't think it's
You don't think that's a problem?
No, I don't think
You don't think that's going to impact momentum in any way?
No, not in any way. I think, it will, had we had the opposite, had we had, a United States that would continue with its leadership, we would probably see, much, much more, a faster pace in this, okay? So yes, let's say, okay, so we will see a delay in the United States. Will we see a delay in other countries? Maybe not. It remains to be seen, but maybe not. Why? Because the real economy is not operating necessarily on the lead of politics. The real economy is operating on economics.
Yeah.
What makes economic sense? Investment
Just
into clean technologies.
hypothetically, it's my horrible duty to play devil's advocate on a stage like
Go
this.
for it.
But if China were to do the same thing, what would you say then?
That would definitely be, I think, actually much, much higher impact because China is the leader of the developing world. And where we need to see the transformation really occur is in the developing world. The developed countries has actually already plateaued, or in fact even decreased already, and will continue to decrease their greenhouse gas emissions. And they've also already plateaued on their GDP. The challenge for developing countries is precisely both of those. The challenge for developing countries is that they need to continue their economic growth, pull out their populations out of poverty, while decreasing their emissions. The countries of the North never did that. And so we're asking developing countries to do something that mankind has never done. And China is the leader of that, right? China is really showing how that can be done.
And you feel good about the noises coming out of China and the momentum that China has built up in this?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them noises, I would call them reality.
Yeah, okay. What are the next really important steps in implementing Paris? I mean, you talk 3-4 years, but what is the next big milestone for you?
Well, again, we have two realities, right? So in the political basket over here, in that bucket, we have 2018 coming up, which is the year in which countries should get together and assess how much they have done from a government point of view and prepare for increasing their ambition, which is what was established in the Paris Agreement. Whether that will be possible by 2018 remains to be seen. Move over to the other bucket. In the other bucket, in the real economy bucket, you actually do see corporations, investors, insurance companies that hold a lot of the investment money, cities, states, regions moving forward. So you do see quite a bit of momentum, not just staying where it is, but actually increasing. And for us, 2018 is actually a critical moment in which we will be supporting the voice of all of these cities and corporations, not just to speak up, but because we are sitting here today, to measure their progress. Thank God for measurement and numbers, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't know whether we're actually progressing or we're standing still or we're going backwards. And so we will be helping them to measure their progress against a very clear milestone, 2020. And that clear milestone is the very imminent milestone that we have on the path of the arc of transformation that is ahead of us, which is a transformation from still a very high carbon economy to a decarbonized economy by 2050. But we can't start doing that in 2050 or 2040. We have to start now. And so 2020 has been established by science as being the moment in time in which we have to show not only that we're flat, because we have been flat for 3 years, but actually we begin to descend.
Yeah. You talk about, we'll come back to that, but you talk about business, and there is business represented in this room, sustainability heads represented in this room who will take this message back to their business. If you were sitting in business, what would your priorities be? What would you be doing? What do these people need to be doing now?
I think that's a pretty simple question. I would be asking what makes sense, not just now for this quarter that we're in, but what makes sense for business continuity. And I think that is for all of us, not just for business, but the huge paradigm shift that we need to make, the mental shift, is to make decisions that take two things into account. Certainly the short term, because there are many factors there, but also the long-term business continuity, the long-term risk, the long-term investment in value. Where is the value proposition long-term? Not just for this quarter. And, to move out of short-termism into a much, much more longer-termism determination of decisions, especially in C-suites, is absolutely the challenge that we as a humanity have. And it's about time that we do that. We've been around now, for a while.
You know, it's a topic that we've discussed on this stage a lot in the past. These people going to their CFOs, their finance directors, who in turn go to the investor and try and sell this piece. And you and I have talked about this a lot in the past as well. They're still coming up against a lot of resistance. How do we? Yes, it's breaking down. We'll bring the SDGs into it in a second as well. But how do we make that happen now?
Well, first of all, I think, we have to acknowledge the resistance, because the moment you deny the resistance, you're not dealing with it. So I think one has to acknowledge the resistance and understand where it's coming from. It's coming from 150 years. It's not just how many years this particular, executive has been at this company. It is a historical legacy that we have, 150 years in which we have been doing things a particular way, i.e. investing in a fossil fuel economy. And so it's very understandable. And all of these people were trained that way, right? When they went to university, and most of them still believe what they learned in college. And so it's understandable that that is the resistance, and it's understandable that they would see anything other than that as being highly risky. But so first of all, my sense is first acknowledge the resistance, that it's there, that it's understandable, that it's justified. Do not underestimate that, because the moment that you try to shoo it out of the room, you've lost the conversation. And so acknowledge that that is there. Acknowledge that the company has actually, whichever one it is, has actually done a huge amount of good over the past X number of decades. And it's not a but, and then move forward and look at what is it going to look like in the future. Is it really going to be the way we have done things over the past 20 to 30 years? So it's more of a conversation, and it's a conversation out of full respect.
Are enough businesses doing the right thing now, putting their money where their mouth is?
No.
Are you beginning to see a shift in that?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me, are enough countries doing it? No. Are enough businesses? No. Because, of course, Miss Impatient Figueres, right? I would want to see this done immediately. But we have to understand that this is not an immediate process. This is not from tonight to tomorrow morning. This is a process. This is an evolution of the economy. And it has to be an intentional evolution. The fact is that if you look at, and sorry, but I'm an anthropologist, right? So I look at the history of mankind. And if you look at the history of mankind, we would move toward a decarbonized economy through a decarbonizing process anyway, right? Because we've been doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years. The point is, however, that we no longer have the luxury of just doing whatever we would have done. We have to intentionally change the timing of an evolution and ensure that we have collective intentionality around the 2020 timeline. So, and that we have enough sectors and companies doing it. So this is, my favorite term here is swallow the alarm clock. Swallow the alarm clock, because we are against time.
How do we, and we'll come on to the Mission 2020 and a little bit more in a second, but how do we translate that strategy into your business? How do businesses pull that in and make it a core part of their strategies?
Well, first of all, it can't be put over into the little, nice to have CSR box. Forget that. That is just absolutely not the way we're going to go. So that's the first challenge, is to say, okay, fine. We've been doing nice little things over here, but that's not enough. It has to be brought into the core strategy. It has to be a C-suite decision to bring it into the core strategy first. And secondly, it's actually pretty simple. It is, what is my carbon intensity? What is my carbon footprint today? And what changes do I need to make, either in my own operation or, in fact, in my value chain going up the stream, in order for me to be Paris compliant, if you will, or in order for me to be at below 2 degrees by 2050? What is the transformation that my company needs to have? And what is the transformation that I need to consider between now and 2020? So this is a long-term strategy with very clear short-term milestones that needs to be envisioned, and it's not very difficult. I mean, this room is full of people who understand numbers and measurement, and that's it. It's about numbers.
You use 3 words over and over again, and on your website, Mission 2020, you talk about necessary, desirable, and achievable. I think your Twitter handle talks about bending the curve of emissions by 2020 as necessary, desirable, and achievable. Talk to us a little bit about how you came up with those words. I imagine you spent a good deal of time choosing them carefully.
Well,
not too long though.
How fun that you asked. Because as we moved up to Paris, we had also a trilogy, if you will. We said we must, we can, and we will about getting to an ambitious agreement. And so now for the post-Paris world, actually it wasn't I who came up with this. It was my fantastic colleague, Tom. Where are you, Tom? Tom? There he is. So it was my fantastic colleague, Tom, who after, much discussion of how do we organize all our thoughts and we have to make it communicable. Was that a word? Mm-hmm. And how do we organize all of the different pieces? And he goes, well, it's very simple. It's necessary, it's advisable, and it's achievable. And it has been a very, very helpful guide, right? Because the necessary part is what science dictates, okay? That is what science says we need to do. The advisable part is about, hello, this is no longer a cost, okay? This is an opportunity. There are so many benefits that come from this that it's a no-brainer. And the achievable is about the economic cost. And we just came from a meeting where Sir Nicholas Stern was saying he actually, when he published his famous report, and he was talking about the cost of action being lower than the cost of inaction. And he said, I totally lowballed that because the fact is that it is so achievable, because, in particular because the technologies are advancing so quickly that they're coming down in cost, they're increasing in their capacity, and therefore they're increasing in their dissemination ability. So it's just becoming more and more achievable every single day. And the exciting thing about this, Axel, is that we are in an era of exponentials. In case you hadn't noticed, we're on exponential curves of everything. And the fun thing about this is that certainly the technologies that will address climate change are on exponential curves, but we're on the flat part of the curve. And we will be seeing over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, we'll be seeing those curves go just like we've seen solar, right? If you look at a curve of installed solar capacity around the world, you see a low, 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 flat, and then all of a sudden it goes all the way up. And that is the exciting thing. We will all see this happen.
Why is 2020 such an important year for climate?
Because, oh my gosh, numbers and measurement, okay? So if there are any climate scientists here, please, do not listen to this because this is an irresponsible simplification. But just for us to understand what we're talking about, understanding that there are many, many wrinkles and many assumptions behind this. But we do have a finite level of carbon emissions that we can put into the atmosphere. Think about it as a big bathtub, okay? That you can begin to fill with water, fill with water, fill with water. At some point, you can no longer fill it with water without it overflowing into huge damage, okay? So that bathtub is 2,000 gigatons of CO2. We've already put out more than 2/3 of that. We only have left available to us, more or less, 800 gigatons. More or less, with many different assumptions, and some will say 700, 600, whatever. But let's take, 800. Now, we're already spewing out, today, we're spewing out 40 gigatons of carbon pollution into the air every year. So it's a pretty simple math, right? 800 divided by 40 gives us...
Don't ask me questions like that in front of people.
Come on, Axel.
My daughter just did her 11 plus exam and I was asking her a question like this.
Even in Costa Rica, okay? 800 divided by 40 is 20, okay?
There you go.
So...
There you go.
That means we only have 20 years. If we continue this level, we only have 20 years of time to continue this level of carbon pollution before we exhaust the budget. And we know that we're not going to go from 40 gigatons to 0 overnight. So we need to have a smooth curve down that allows for the economy to have a planned, organized transition of jobs, of investments, of technology. And in order to have that smooth transition, to be at decarbonization by 2050, we have to start at 2020.
So start at 2020. So the 20s, I imagine that decade will be the most challenging?
No, this window of opportunity right now, the next 3 to 4 years is going to be the most challenging because we have to get over the hump, right? And when we're almost there, that's a really exciting thing, right? We've already have 3 years of flat emissions while GDP has been growing. With renewable energy, we're already at 23.7% of all the energy being produced in the world is renewable energy. By 2020, we have to be at 30. Doable, frankly, very doable, and on down the line. So there are many different areas in which we need to have this transition, but it is achievable because we already know there is no technology that we need to invent in order to be able to meet the 2020 milestone. We have the finance, okay? We have the technologies, and we have the science. All we need to do is connect the dots and get the darn thing done.
You talk about radical collaboration as well. In fact, an event that we've done here at the Crowd was on radical openness, which talked about similar things. What does radical collaboration, the way you talk about it on the Mission 2020 site, mean?
Well, it means a couple of things. First of all, it means across boundaries, because we tend to collaborate with those we agree with, or we tend to collaborate with those inside our little sector or inside our country in the best of all cases. And that's not going to work, right? This has to be cross boundaries. So no matter what boundary you recognize, cross that boundary. Because it's about sectors working with each other. It's about countries working with each other. It's about people who don't agree with us working with them. So it's about cross-boundary collaboration. And it's radical also because it is imbued by this stubborn, and I appreciate, the politically correct word is relentless, but I prefer stubborn, which is not what Thich Nhat Hanh would say. But this is imbued with this stubborn optimism that, yes, of course, we're always going to have evidence to the contrary. And, you can just read the newspapers, right? And you can see all the evidence to the contrary. Same evidence that we had leading up to Paris. But you have to understand, yes, that is evidence to the contrary, but we also have a responsibility not to accept the reality that is given to us, but to transform that reality and create the reality that we want, that we need, and that we're going to give to our children.
Okay, so that's radical collaboration, and I guess that fits in with this idea that you're a convener of Mission 2020. There isn't this hierarchical structure, it seems, when we look at this organization that you're working for now.
It's not even an organization.
Okay, but how do you describe your role now?
A troublemaker.
Yeah, but what do you post Paris? Now you're not working at the UN anymore. Describe your role to us in a few more words than simply convener.
Well, I think it's very difficult, for people to understand that there are some of us who don't want to be put into a little box of, working for, a company, blah, 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 or NGO, blah, 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 or whatever. Those of us who are working on this, and it is an everyday expanding group of people around the world, are here because we know that we have to do this. We collective, right? The world needs to do this. So we're here just launching the voice, launching the call, imbuing everybody with this sense of urgency that we need to do this, we need to do it together, and how can I help you? Trying people to connect the dots, right? Many times there's a lot of potential that doesn't get actualized because the connections are not made. So, country X or mayor X, would like to, disseminate technology Y, but doesn't know how to do it because who's going to give them the technology and who's going to finance it? Well, let's get those connections done, right? So, and probably the technology provider is actually looking for a mayor who would be willing to put that technology there because they need to understand about the technology. So we're about having our ears very open, and we have a pretty wide network, and connecting the dots. I guess it's about, putting oil into these wheels and having them move smoother and faster.
I mean, you did, 5 COP meetings, I think it was? 5, 6?
6, I hope.
6. I mean, it pretty tough going, a lot of that, let's face it. But the energy is infectious. Have you ever felt more optimistic, despite what we've seen in the US, despite what with the US sitting on the fence right now? Have you ever felt more optimistic?
Isn't that funny that I feel more optimistic now?
So you do?
Yeah, I do. And I will admit that I feel very optimistic because of what I'm seeing in technology. Okay, so that is already sort of my focus there. And I see it very much in technology and renewable energies and increasingly in transportation. Where I don't feel the same amount of confidence is on what we're doing on land use. I think that is really far behind.
On land use?
Land use.
Okay.
So restoration of degraded lands, the turnover toward agricultural practices that are more sustainable, that whole area, the protection of primary forests, that whole area is an area that is of concern because I'm not quite as confident that we're on track with that one.
Okay. What are the key, I mean, and you've touched on this briefly, but what are the breakthrough technologies that really excite you right now?
Well, I think everything to do with solar is definitely, like just totally going through, I was going to say through the roof, but of course that's where solar is, right? So solar is just incredible, right? Mm-hmm. Just incredible because they're coming down with prices. They're now at 3 cents a kilowatt hour, which is unbeatable by anyone. And new breakthroughs that I know are coming down the pike that I can't disclose here, but that are going to actually bring down that price even farther and make solar energy even
new
more.
Breakthroughs that we've talked about quite a bit, or that have been spoken about in the media quite a bit?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so really exciting new stuff.
Very exciting.
You're not going to share anything with us, are you?
Not tonight.
Shame.
But very exciting. Wind also, I think wind, continues to increase its capacity and its location, right? I mean, what is cool, I have a sort of strange sense of humor, but I think it's very, very cool to see that now we're having offshore wind that is being installed by those engineers who used to put in, oil exploration sites out there, and who are using their engineering skills to put in wind turbines in the same waters. And that is the kind of transformation that I think is very exciting. And the latest, which is just absolutely amazing, is electrified flight.
Right.
I mean, that is really amazing. Siemens just announced last week that they're working on the electrification of aviation such that they will be able to put airplanes on the market that are completely electric and will be able to have a range of 1,000 kilometers. And all of these short-range flights in Europe will be able to be done with...
I think Airbus is in this as well.
Airbus also.
I mean, how realistic is that in the next decade, would you say?
I think it's realistic.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I've got a little list here as well, and I just wanted a quick sort of crystal ball Christiana Figueres comment on what will happen in the space. Battery storage is another thing. Can you say anything on that?
Battery storage, thank God for Elon Musk, right?
Right.
But we need about 10 or 20 Elon Musks that are going to make the investment in first in volume of battery storage, but also increase. But the other thing, talk about exciting breakthroughs, is the concept that we have many engineers working on, which is once we have electric vehicles that have batteries, then those electric vehicles can actually become the storage for your home. Because here's the interesting thing: if I use a vehicle,
you don't drive a Tesla.
No, I don't drive anything. I get driven by the wonderful tube system in London.
Okay,
but if you have a car and if that car is electric, then you use the car to go someplace. And while you're gone, you don't necessarily use your electricity at home, right? When you come back, then you use the electricity. So the cars can actually become the disseminated battery system. So think about it, instead of thinking of a battery, think about a network of batteries that actually store the energy for when you need it at night. And that's actually completely different way of thinking, right? And I just think it's so exciting because all of the technology, in particular in energy, but also in transportation, everything that we know right now is just going to be thrown out the door. And my grandchildren, don't have any yet, my grandchildren will be thinking how ridiculous it is that we had vehicles that had liquid fuel. And they're going to be like, what do you mean liquid fuel? For what? because that won't exist anymore. Just like I look back when I'm 60 years old, so I was old enough to use a mainframe computer to write my dissertation in college. And a mainframe computer, for all of you young people, is a computer that was the size of this room. And you had to get cards and punch them in and all of this. And you had asked me then, is it possible that everybody will be running around with a little computer in their pocket that is 1,000 times more powerful than this huge room? I would have said, oh, you're crazy. But that is the kind of evolution that we're going to see in the energy field. And that is so exciting.
This idea of Moore's law for carbon, right, is something I read about.
Johann Rockström.
Yes, right. And I say that with a layperson's hat on, but that's something you buy into.
Dr. Johann Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Institute has put forward a very interesting idea. And I think the virtue of it is that it simplifies in very understandable terms what it is that we need to do. And what Johann says is, in order to get onto the path of 2050, just look at yourself for what you are. Just do your carbon footprint right now, whether you are a country, a city, a state, a region, a person, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just, you take your carbon footprint, and then what you need to do to be carbon compliant with 2050 is you need to go to half of those emissions every decade. Okay? So you need to be, by 2020, you need to be at the top. But then after that, by 2030, you need to be half of where you were by 2020. By 2040, you need to be at half of where you were by 2030. Right. And that takes us to the necessary decrease by 2050. So it's an interesting thought.
Back to some of these headline figures, the 2% and then the 1.5% that we've spoken about a bit.
2 degrees.
Sorry, my apologies. 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees. When at a time when people still think 2 is unachievable, how hard is it to push this 1.5 for you right now?
My sense is that what is going to give us the 1.5 is the exponential nature of technological development, not necessarily policy, right? Okay. Because policy doesn't move quickly enough. I think the exponential nature of technology will allow us to squeeze into the 1.5.
How did you get into this in the first place? I want to talk a little bit about you, and we'll circle back to some of this big picture stuff. But how did you get in?
And we have a little video that we want to show.
Yes, and we want to show a little video as well. But how did Christiana Figueres get interested in climate change? And I know it's got something to do with a Costa Rican toad, right?
Yes, you've done your homework.
I've done my homework. Go on, tell us.
Yes, it does. Well, actually, why did I get into it is because of my daughters, because I have a 27 and a 29-year-old daughter. When I was, and my concern is, what is the quality of life that I'm giving them? And my daughters represent, obviously, the most important part of my life, but they also represent future generations, 7 generations down, for me. So when I look at my daughters, I see them, but I also see all young people and all future generations. So when I was a little girl, I used to travel quite a bit with my parents who were in politics. And you do this campaigning thing, and you go everywhere. And I went to a forest in Costa Rica National Park that had an endemic little golden toad, a beautiful little animal. And when my daughters were the same age that I was when I saw the toad, this toad had disappeared. This toad disappeared in 1989, which means that I was the witness of a disappearance of a species, because that was the only place that this species existed. And it had a huge impact on me, Axel, right? Because I thought, oh my God, if in my lifetime I have witnessed the disappearance of a species, I personally, okay, I have witnessed the disappearance of the species, what is going on the rest of the world? And I thought, and there was a big question mark to me, and I went, what's going on here? And that's when I started reading up and asking scientists and Now, after that, it has not incontrovertibly been proven that that little toad was extinguished only because of climate change. There is a relationship between temperature and a particular fungus on their skin, et cetera, et cetera. But it was what led me to climate change. And it was what, I was just thought, a young mother, my children were 1 and 2 years old, and I thought there's no way that I can have inherited a planet and then turn over that planet severely diminished to my children. We just don't do that as parents.
Okay, so this relentless optimist, as you've been described.
Stubborn optimist.
Sorry, stubborn optimist starts out on this. How?
So can I tell you the story of optimism when I started being when I started being stubborn?
Go.
I was 3 years old. Okay, so I was 3 years old, and my father didn't like to play many games, but he did play croquet. And he was out playing croquet, and it's a huge green expanse to play croquet. And I was just standing there watching, and I could see where he was going to hit the ball. So I went there and plopped myself, and at that time, I was much broader than tall. And I just plopped myself in front of his ball. And he came up and he said, "Christiana, please move. Christiana, please move." I have no idea how many times he asked me to please move. The tone of the voice kept on getting higher and higher. And, the tone of the voice got higher and higher, and I was just, firmer and firmer in my steps. And he finally just picked me up from the scruff of my neck and threw me. And then I landed someplace, and I thought, there's no way that I'm going to cry about this, right? I stood up and went, "Where is he playing next?" And went over and stood in front of his ball again. And, my family has told me always that I am an absolute stubborn person. And I've actually found out that it's actually fine to be stubborn.
Okay.
As long as it's for the common good.
Okay. And that's how... And you,
which was not the case with the ball.
And you put a lot of your... you put a lot of the success that you've had then since then, and the fact that people listen to you, the fact that you've reached or helped nations reach these agreements down to your personality, and what else?
No, I don't do that. People have said that, and I don't know if that's true or not. But I do know that that I always search for some way out, okay? And the door always closes on you, and the window always closes, but that doesn't mean that you give up. It means that, okay, well, so the door's closed, well, then let's find some other door. Or let's just, dig underneath the door or climb over the door. It's just, when you're on a path and when you have a mission to accomplish, and when you know that we have to do it, then you just don't give up just because, somebody got elected or somebody got kicked out of office or whatever.
Sure.
You have to move forward.
When was the last time you felt really downhearted about this whole thing?
I got very nervous many times during the negotiations of Paris, and my colleagues who worked with me there know that every single COP had an absolute disastrous moment, if not 10, where we all thought, okay, this is all going down the toilet, okay, all going down the toilet. But then something, we just search for some other answer. And so it's not that I'm 100% of the time optimistic. I do get, hit by reality very often. But the point is to be stubborn about the optimism, right? Not to give up.
And Zen Buddhism, I mean, we heard a little bit in the introduction about this. Just very quickly, how does that fit in? How much support has that given you? And from what I've read, it gave you a lot of support through Paris.
Yes, it did. So 3 or 4 years ago, I happened to discover Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Zen master from Vietnam. And honestly, I knew nothing about Buddhism before this. And I just, I followed his teachings and did readings, and I did frequent a Buddhist monastery and still do, because I find that there's a lot to be learned there. Because first of all, about who we are as people, what we're all about, how do we communicate with others, how do we relate to others, and about how do we bring about change in a non-confrontational manner. And it was an incredible help for me professionally, but also personally, because I was struggling with a huge personal issue during the whole lead up to Paris. And I was really finding it difficult to balance between what I had to do, for my professional life, and how do I deal with. And we all have this, right? We all have some backpack that we're carrying, and that if we let that personal backpack get in the way of what we need to do, then we just don't get the task done. So Thich Nhat Hanh was very helpful in helping me deal with my personal backpack.
Is it refreshing to be out of the UN framework and now doing this Mission 2020 piece? Is it a breath of fresh air for you to be out of that bureaucracy? Yeah,
it is refreshing in two senses. A, I'm no longer responsible for the admin. Not that the United Nations has any administration whatsoever, right? But that whole bureaucratic thing is unbelievable how much time it takes and how much energy and how much love you have to put into it, honestly, to get it to work where you need to. And so not to have to do that is hugely fantastic. And the other thing is, now I can say what I want.
Right.
I don't have to be diplomatic anymore, and it was quite a discipline to be diplomatic during that whole time. And so now I can say what I want.
To come back, and I know you want to show this little film, and I do want to open it up to our audience as well for their questions. I have plenty more for you, but we can't go on all evening. To come back full circle, I started with Donald Trump and his agenda and what's happened in the US. I wonder to what extent, talking about the context again, you're worried about the rise of globalism and populism, and whether you think climate change has become too closely associated with a liberal globalist movement.
Yeah, I mean, that is really too bad, right? That climate change has actually become so politicized in so many countries, or in some countries at least, because this really is not about politics. If there ever was a agenda that truly represents the interest of the populace in the Latin sense, right? The interest of the people, it's climate. Ironically. And this should be, if we really understood what the word populist means, instead of the definition that we have ascribed to it in the political science world, this should be the most populist agenda ever, because climate change affects more people around the world today and tomorrow than any other agenda in the world, by far. And it has both the deepest negative consequential effects if we don't deal with it, but it also has the deepest and most exciting opportunities if we deal with it.
How open, Christiana, do we need to be about the idea that there are big losers in this vision as well? The fossil fuel companies. What do you say to the BPs and the Shells and the coal companies who actually, and this is my next question, a number of these getting on board and saying to the president, please don't pull out of Paris. I'd be interested to hear your views on that. But we do need to be open to the fact that there are going to be big losers in this as well, right?
I don't think so.
You don't?
No, because I don't think there are any predefined losers. The losers will be those who refuse to move forward. Those who don't understand, or those who are not able, just because you're talking about fossil fuel companies, let's look at that. Those fossil fuel companies who continue to see themselves as being coal companies or natural gas and oil companies, if they continue to see themselves as that and operate as that, they will become losers. But if they reframe themselves and they understand that they are energy providing companies, okay, and that they need to move with the time, and that they don't necessarily have to be chained into the technologies of last century, but that they can actually fly with the technologies of this century, and they can invest, and many of them are. You look at Total, they're investing into renewable energy and buying a big battery storage company. You look at Saudi Aramco, you could say, well, of course Saudi Arabian company is never going to do that. No, Saudi Aramco is selling a huge part of its assets and using the capital from that to invest in renewable energy. Yeah. So the losers are self-defined, because it's not the companies, it is the way they are treating the natural resources. So if you redefine your relationship with the natural resources of this planet, of course you can be a winner.
Why are some of the big coal companies, in your view, getting on board with Paris now and saying to their president...
Business continuity.
That's it, is it?
Of course. Who wants to be a Kodak?
Is it not, and I say this, it sounds cynical, that they want to be able to control and massage the agenda. So keep it on the table, be part of it, and they can control it in the future better.
Well, what agenda would they control?
The fact that the US isn't pulling out of this altogether and stays part of it means they're still part of the discussion. No?
I mean,
too cynical?
Yes, yeah, I think so, frankly, too cynical. Yes, they're getting, bending the ear of who more now in the United States, but how long is that going to last? You know, I mean, there is a thing called democracy, and he will be out of office. And I don't even think that most of the threats that we heard during the campaign rhetoric are actually going to come into effect. And even those measures that are taken, will they actually have an impact? For example, the claim that has been made that retiring or sending the Clean Power Plan into review, because it's a plan that was never actually active, so that's cute to say that you're repealing something that was never active. But what he actually did was send it into review. I mean, and the claim that this is actually going to bring back coal jobs. I mean, honestly, right? There are no new coal jobs, particularly in the United States, but elsewhere as well. Why? First, because oil and gas, being less carbon intensive and cheaper, have put coal out of the market. And B, because that coal that is there, that the companies still do want to extract by their own self-admission, I'm not inventing this, by their own self-admission, is actually being extracted through much more advanced technology. Not by miners, not by people. It's being extracted by technological means. And so there are no jobs in coal. And to stand there, and say we're going to bring back the coal jobs, it's a little bit like saying, we're going to bring back the Kodak jobs. I mean, they just don't know.
All right, let's get to some questions from the audience. There is a microphone hovering around. Who has the first question for Christiana? Yeah, gentleman right here.
Hi. Hi, Christiana. Thank you very much. Martin Rich from Future Fit Foundation. Thanks for your comments. Loved all of it. We've talked about new technologies providing energy. We talked a little bit about Carl Rockström's carbon law, which is really interesting. Part of his trajectory, however, is quite a big uptake in sequestration and capture technologies.
Soil sequestration or
carbon.
CCS, carbon.
Yeah. So you've talked about your belief and love of the generational technologies. I think there's more skepticism around the ability of sequestration technologies to work. So a couple of just your thoughts around that and how that fits in with.
Yeah, just to make sure we don't talk about natural sequestration of the soil. You're talking of soil of carbon. You're talking about actual industrial sequestration.
So in Rockström's carbon
CCS.
law, in the paper he wrote, he foresees yes, there's an increase in natural sequestration, so reforestation, soils, etc. But there was also quite a substantial increase in the ability of mankind, industrial storage.
No, it really is a very important question, and just to load that platform, let me throw nuclear into there as well, because the huge question is, will we be able to do what we need to do without resorting to carbon capture, use, and sequestration industrially, or without building out more nuclear capacity. And because the nuclear capacity, of course, has all of the downsides it has, plus increased cost because of increased safety issues, and is clean. So, there are many who would want to put it into the clean basket. And carbon capture, use, and storage, what it allows is to expand the lifetime of, in particular, fossil fuels, because you can sequester that. So, it's completely impossible to say what is the straight line that we're going to use here. But I would say the longer that we delay in the upscaling of true renewable energy, the more we might have to depend on other technologies, such as carbon capture and storage, or in fact nuclear, to get us to where we need to be. So that's why my interest is in pushing renewable energy as quickly as we can, because it keeps us out of these very, very risky issues.
All right. Yeah, lady here, and then we'll come to you.
Thank you, Christiana. Asun Sinclair, DMBGL. I would like to hear you saying a little bit more about something you have not really addressed, and that is the identification and assessment of climate risks for companies and their financial consequences. This is one of your key themes in Mission 2020, and we have now the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which really presents a very interesting framework. But do we have the science to really help companies mobilize in this? And how can we use this risk disclosure and integration into risk management to really speed up the process of motivation and incentives?
So we do have a very important issue. Yes, we do have the science. It's not rocket science. I truly, guarantee this. We have the science. It's not rocket science to be able to understand what the carbon impact is of any company. The carbon disclosure task force that has been started by Mark Carney and chaired now by Mike Bloomberg is very important because it is really beginning to open up the political space for a disclosure, a broad global disclosure that is not new, because CDP has been doing this for years. So what the carbon disclosure task force does is it gives it much more political weight, and it is, if you will, democratizing the concept more. And it is hopefully moving toward a much more structured approach of risk, where I've already heard some of the members of the task force say we need to move to the point where this is not just voluntary, but actually regulated and expected of companies to do so. And I have no doubt that we will move into that direction. How quickly, we don't know. But the fact is anybody knows, whatever you can't measure, you cannot manage it. And so to be forced to look at what your carbon footprint is from year to year in particular, it's not as important what you're emitting today, it's important what your trajectory is. If you're on a trend of increasing your emissions, you're not on the right track. If you're on a trend of decreasing, particularly if you take Johan's carbon law into account, then you're doing the right thing. So yes, disclosure is important, but you can't stop there. Disclosure is the first step toward managing your carbon footprint.
Okay, yeah, right here. Then we'll come to you.
Ian Rogers, Sustainability Director at Arup. Thank you. It's a very thought-provoking talk. We have an economy in this country which could be characterized by people buying things they don't need with money they don't have. We have a rapidly growing middle class.
I thought that was a description of the US.
Oh, and the UK, yeah. We have a rapidly growing middle class in China, all of whom want to start eating meat and ditch their bikes and buy cars. The future that you've described doesn't incorporate behavioral change. Can we really have it all? Is technology going to deliver this solution, and nobody needs to change the way that they behave? Or do you think that actually we're going to have to confront some realities about the way that we behave, and those are going to be politically challenging?
I think we need to do both. I think we need to work at the systemic level, which we have discussed tonight, which is very, very urgent. But we also need, and I would characterize that as top-down, we also need to work bottom-up. And I would warn that the issue of consumption or overconsumption is very much of a northern issue, because you won't hear that conversation in China, India, Bangladesh, anywhere else in the global south, because that is not their reality. Yes, they have a growing middle class, and that middle class, surprise, surprise, wants mobility. What's wrong with that? And those people who are coming out of poverty, they do want more protein in their diet. So our responsibility is actually to stand up and rise to that challenge and be able to provide these people who very justifiably want more comfort, want better living conditions, with a clean option to do so. If the only option that they have is a gas-guzzling car, well, are we going to blame them for that? No, we have to make sure that they have the option, as China's doing, because they're putting 5 million zero-emission vehicles on the streets. Now, in China, 5 million is nothing, right? But this is their little pilot project that they're putting on the streets. 5 million cars by 2020, and then very quickly ramping up after that. So one does have to be sensitive, because that conversation about consumption and, in fact, about economic growth is a divided line between North and South. And we have to be careful about not imposing our, guilt, if I will, our guilt about overconsumption, imposing that guilt on people who haven't had that in the past.
Yeah, right there.
Alexandra Ross Taylor, Density Regis Network. As a stubborn optimist myself, it was a very inspiring discussion, so thank you very much. But my question is, I was wondering if you could elaborate on the land use issue and really what solutions you see to that question, because I completely agree that it's one thing that's really not being dealt with in a decent way.
And it is very frustrating, right? Because it's not like we don't know how to do it. But there are, unfortunately, many components to that. One, and the very, very urgent, is to conserve the last remaining primary forests that we have, that are every day less. And, I don't have to speak to you about species, both flora and fauna that could be there that we will never be able to replicate. So conserving primary forests first. Secondly, everything to do with restoration of degraded lands. There are belts around the world. Let's think, right now about the Sahel, belts of huge expanse of area where the desert is literally growing every day because it is in an intensive process of desertification, which has nothing to do with dessert, but with desert. In a process of desertification because of increasing drought in those areas. And what that means, of course, is that the people that live in those areas do not have the possibility to grow their food or to have the water that they need translate into forced migration. So that's where all of these things, the sustainable development goals, are really linked one to the other. So the restoration of degraded lands in order to provide for food security and water security is absolutely critical. And the third component to that is in those areas where there is agriculture but it is not sustainable, it's the conversion of agriculture into more sustainable practices such as no-till. That really does require a lot of behavioral change, coming back to, behavioral change. And that is, teaching every single farmer or in fact, the large agricultural companies that they can do things differently. And so it's, the difficulty with all of this is that, although we know what we need to do, it is highly disseminated and decentralized. It's not as easy as putting in, a huge power plant someplace. It's highly disseminated, very, very decentralized, does require a lot of behavioral change based on education that is necessary, but it is by definition slow. And I think that is why that is a sector that is actually lagging behind.
Okay. Yes, right here.
Sorry, I knew there was, the fourth part of that is deforestation, right? Sorry about that, but deforestation, absolutely critical that we actually turn deforestation around by 2020. And that can be done actually by large companies because they are the ones that are mostly responsible for that. Sorry, there are four components. I've added the fourth.
Hi, Nicola Robinson from McDonald's. So someone who works a lot on the former issues just mentioned.
Yeah.
I've got a social science question for you. As an aspiring sustainability leader myself, I'm really interested to understand what your top tips for influencing are when you're dealing with conflicting agendas and trying to secure a common, shared and ambitious vision for the future.
Tip number 1, listen. Tip number 2, listen. Tip number 3, listen. Because we do tend to have this, immediate reaction when we perceive that the person sitting in front of us has a different opinion. We go, and everything goes down. The window closes, and there's no longer a conversation. To be able to hold yourself open and to listen to whoever is sitting across from you, in particular if that person has a very different viewpoint, and really understanding why does that person have that viewpoint. It's not because they're stubborn, it's not because they're stupid, there is a very good reason for that. And can I actually get around it and understand how she or he comes to that conclusion? Because many times, if you really understand the reason, there is a different way of approaching the concern that is not necessarily the approach that is causing the problem. But you can never get to that unless you really listen to that person with an open ear and an open heart.
Is that something you've got better and better at as one COP happens, the next COP, the next COP, or do you need that fundamentally as part of you? That ability to listen.
I hope that I'm getting better at that. And very interestingly, that is another very, very key lesson in Buddhism, and in particular in Thich Nhat Hanh's practice, is what he calls deep listening, and was very, very helpful to me, because we do tend to close our little blinds, as soon as, oh, well, that person, and sometimes we don't even wait to, let the person speak, just because, the person comes from whatever country, or works for whatever company, or works for whatever NGO. Why?
Does criticism hurt you? I mean, there have been critical comments in the past. How does that affect you? And how has that changed?
Criticism. Well, I think the funniest criticism that I have received, and I got quite a bit of it, is that I'm a communist.
Yeah, I heard that.
Because I do, I do recognize what China is doing and how they're contributing in the past and certainly now in the present. And so, from there to go to say, that I'm a communist, I think that's just very funny criticism, but there is a lot of that out there. And what other criticism is there? I don't know. Maybe that I'm irresponsibly optimistic. Okay, fine. I'd rather err on that side than on the other side. I don't know. No, I think it's funny.
Okay, good. I've got time for a couple more questions. Yeah. Okay, we'll take those two there, and we'll take this one as well. Go ahead.
Tom Popple from Natural Capital Partners. Thank you again for being an optimist. A question here around corporate responsibility beyond reductions. I know you've been quite an advocate of carbon neutrality, and I wonder what your opinion is of going deeper, faster, using market-based approaches around carbon financing.
I've always been, a very enthusiastic proponent of market approaches. In fact, my first foray into climate was through the market. That's how I got into climate. And I believe very strongly in the market for many different reasons. A, because I think market, you have to price things that you don't want as opposed to the other. So putting a price on carbon is very, very helpful. Secondly, because in particular, when you get into a market between North and South, those financial flows are really allowing countries in the South to pursue many different financial investments that perhaps wouldn't have been possible without that. And also because I just think it's very healthy. I think it's very, very healthy to be able to get to very concrete numbers about how much is here. You see, the market really forces you to measure every single ton because you're going to pay for the ton. And if you don't have that discipline of measuring the ton or the 10,000 tons or the million tons or whatever, then you don't know what the atmosphere is seeing. And the atmosphere, she does see those tons. But she's the only one that really does see those tons unless we have the discipline to measure. So for all those three reasons, I am a very, very ardent proponent of the market. And I really think it's very lamentable that we have such a lull in the market right now. But I do think that it's going to come back over the next 3 to 5 years as countries get more and more serious about this. I think we will see a revived market.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
Thank you. Richard Northcote from Covestro. I'm very interested in what you just said about markets, and to turn that one step further to capital markets, because it's one area we haven't looked at in any detail today. You say that private sector has got to move along, but the private sector is dictated by the capital markets and the returns that they expect to have. The problem you've got, if the private sector is only going to measure the return on capital invested and doesn't care about what the emissions are, how can you get that exponential change in the capital markets? Wouldn't it be better if we could find some way that they were looking for a return on carbon employed, for example? that they were investing carbon in a way that was giving them a good return rather than just burning the stuff.
Yeah, which is pricing carbon. So putting a price on carbon would, of course, make the wheels move much faster. There have been many attempts to put a price on carbon globally. And the fact is that there was enough political resistance to that concept in Paris that it was not possible to agree to that. But we do have 60 jurisdictions that do have a price on carbon. We have 40 of them that have a price on carbon because of trading schemes, and 20 of them because they have a price on carbon due to a carbon tax. And those jurisdictions are only growing. So China being, again, the supposed communist, China has 7 pilot projects in 7 of its largest cities that they have been experimenting with a carbon market and a price on carbon. And this year they are due to have a national price on carbon and a national market, which will have a huge impact on pricing carbon and on the market. Unfortunately, if you could do this top down, which is what was done under the Kyoto Protocol, by the way, with the CDM, which was a top-down instrumentalization of the market, that would make things much, much quicker. But this time around, that was not possible, and now we have to do it bottom up.
Okay, let's have a final question right here.
Thank you. Today I read in the papers that the Great Barrier Reef has been subject to something like 2/3 of the whole of the reef has been bleached over the last year, 2 years. That to me is a huge flashing red light. And to me it's a flashing red light and I can do so much about it. But I'm kind of wondering really how governments really respond to this, whether you're looking at the Australian government or others, because we can only see so many of these red lights before it's too late. But I'm not really sure, and from your experience, how these politicians do respond to these things, or if they do respond to these things, and what do they then do about it, because it seems so urgent.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, and it really is a huge alarm bell, and it joins other alarm bells, right? So everything that we've heard in the past few months about Arctic ice melt was also a huge alarm. What we're seeing in desertification, there are compounding evidence, and to those who say, well, climate change doesn't exist. Well, the evidence is just compounding, and every day getting more and more, not just more and more convincing, but more and more threatening and dangerous, which is why we are really on this urgent mission. Because honestly, every day that we're not reducing emissions, and it's not that I don't believe in adaptation, please don't get me wrong, because many, many, many communities around the world are already adapting to the negative impacts of climate change, and that is absolutely crucial for the quality of life of those people. But if we do not reduce emissions, there's never going to be enough adaptation. We will never bring back the coral reef. We will never have, the ice cores that we used to have. We will never get the glaciers back. If we lose all the glaciers, and they're on track to be lost, we will never get those glaciers back. So, there is an urgency here that I just don't think that we're actually reacting to. We being everyone. It's not just governments. It's everybody that has a role. And I would just like to, can I just finish up with this, Axel?
Please do, yeah.
I just want to invite all of you to really assume a personal responsibility. Because if we assume that this is only the responsibility of somebody else, of the government of the United States, or the government of China, or the whatever, or McDonald's, or somebody else, this exporting responsibility to everyone else is just not going to get us anywhere. And all of you are here because A, you understand this, because you are committed in some way to the family of these topics. You understand that if we do not limit the emissions and begin to come down, there is no way in hell that we will, you see, I didn't used to say that at the UN, that we would ever be able to get to the SDGs. Please think about this, okay? Countries that are going to be hit over and over and over again by natural disasters are going to have to use their very scarce resources to rebuild the roads, to rebuild the schools, to rebuild the homes, to rebuild the hospitals. And they're going to have to rebuild and rebuild and rebuild. They will never have the resources to be able to pursue any of the sustainable development goals. They will never be able to bring their people out of poverty, which is the most important sustainable development goal. And without bringing people out of poverty, mark my words, there is no peace on this planet. no peace on this planet. So this is not, this is not children's, bedtime story. This is serious. And it is for all of us to do something about this. My invitation to you tonight is to take personal responsibility and to really understand that you do have a circle of influence. There is some area that you can influence, and you can. So please do. Influence for urgency. Make this a call that we all take to every single area that we can. Because this is not going to come only from the systemic level to come back to behavioral changes. This is about all of us taking responsibility and really understanding the urgency of this. We will never get those barrier reefs back, ever, ever.
All right. Look, you've given us
Don't
a lot of
wait.
your time. Yes, and we're going to watch this very quick film, right? Which I guess the way I tee it up is this is how you would summarize your Mission 2020.
Well, this is because I believe that although this is incredibly serious, that humor in life is also a serious venture. And so this is a humorous take on the urgency that we have.
Okay, let's play it.
Damn, where is that kid? Sorry, man, but it's too late.
I can't slow down. What time is it, Mike? 2:59.
You have no concept of time?
A registration ended at 3.
Please.
I'm sorry that you're late. The ship will detonate in 10 minutes.
I got him. Hang in there, baby.
People being late.